Okay, Coach Dyke, congratulations. What does it mean to you to be a full-time member of the University of Arizona volleyball staff?
Thank you, first of all. It means the world to me. This is kind of where my whole volleyball journey started, and the fact that I get to come back and work for Dave and Rita is it's pretty special. So I'm excited to to start and then start helping.
Coach Rubio, what does Matt bring to your staff?
Well, certainly there's a certain amount of familiarity that goes with having Matt, and I think for me that was the overriding factor was being able to hire someone that I knew that what their personality was going to be inside the gym and what they were going to bring in terms of being a trainer, and that was a really important factor for me in terms of hiring Matt.
Coach Rubio, what is the latest right now? I know everything is fluid and constantly changing, but as we sit here on, I guess, July 15th, where do we stand right now? Are there ladies who are practicing? Is there a date when they can start practicing? Where is volleyball right now?
You know, that's a really good question. You know, I think we were all slated a couple of weeks ago to bring in the first phase of the players, which would have been our returning players on the 5th of July. And then the following week, our incoming freshmen. And, you know, right now we are in a delayed start indefinitely. And so until we get the word from the administration of when we can actually report, we're kind of in limbo. In regards to the conference, as you know, the Pac-12 has followed with the Big Ten model, what they announced last Wednesday. And so right now it's conference only. The biggest question is when we're actually going to be able to start those matches. And like men's basketball, we've been on an unbalanced schedule for the past several years. And so there's discussion on whether or not we're going to go with a round robin and a 2-round robin, which would allow everyone to play everyone and have a true champion, or if we're going to keep the same schedule that we have and try to put in some weeks where we can make up some matches should we miss matches because of being in quarantine. So we're going to we have our weekly meeting tomorrow on Thursday, and we'll have a discussion and probably come up with a firm plan on what our schedule is going to be.
Thank you.
Dave, I know Greg was very involved with the recruiting side of it. What do you see Matt's responsibilities being, how you break that stuff down?
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Yeah, Greg was certainly, when I first hired him 7-8 years ago now, his primary duty, and I brought him in, was for recruiting. For Matt, that's not going to be his number one priority. Rita has now kind of moved into in Greg's position in the role that he played as a primary recruiter, and Matt will certainly be involved in recruiting, but primarily he's going to be one of the trainers in the gym and someone who's going to handle the day-to-day operations of the program. But for me, Matt's number one job is going to be the facilitation of the players' relationship with the coaches and his ability to train the position, which will be an outside hitters. He'll be training the outside hitters for us.
This question is for Matt. When did this whole thing kind of start? I mean, when did Coach Rubio and the athletic department first reach out to you about joining the staff? And then how did the story, I guess, come about?
When Greg decided to resign for his health reasons, Dave reached out and asked if I would be interested, and talked a lot with Dave about his philosophy and where he sees things going. And obviously I've always been close with Dave and admired him and Rita. And for me, once I was offered the job, it was an obvious, a very obvious yes. So I would say probably, that was probably about 2 months ago. And then obviously the pandemic can kind of, keep things, going somewhat slower. But I mean, for me, it was a very obvious yes to join Dave and Rita.
This question's for Matt. So what you know, your family has sort of been around U of A volleyball for a while. What does this mean for you now to be, you know, an assistant coach after all this time of, you know, you starting out as a manager, your sister playing, your father being a volunteer coach. So it's sort of in your blood now. What does this all mean to you?
Yeah, it's pretty neat. I mean, even if you go back to when I was in 6th and 7th grade, my family's always been very close with Dave, and we've been lifelong Wildcat fans because of Dave, and we have some other uncles and aunts that have played sports also at the U of A. So I grew up almost a Wildcat. So when Dave told me when I was a junior in high school that I had a chance to come work for him at a high school, that was amazing. I learned a ton as a manager, not only from Dave about volleyball, but also how to work hard, how to be organized, how to connect with players, and then obviously coached the Central, done a lot of stuff with the club. Was an assistant at Eastern Washington, and kind of came back full circle. And I feel pretty ready to, you know, hop in and help. And I mean, yeah, it's just really special to be back here. And obviously, you know, my wife and kids are stoked, and my mom and dad are thrilled, and my sister couldn't be happier. So it's pretty neat that, you know, I get to be back here doing what I love.
This question is just for anybody who can answer. I mean, have you guys thought as a coaching staff at all about what you're going to do with the dual sport athletes if the season were to get moved in the spring? Because that would obviously start to butt heads with a couple of the players on the roster.
Yeah, certainly with Lauren Ware and with Shelby O'Neill. Let me address the Shelby O'Neill person and player. She's been kind of designated a redshirt this year anyway, so that's not going to be a real issue for us. The Lauren Ware issue, because she's an impact player for both programs, and Dee and I haven't really had a discussion about that possibility, and we probably won't until that actually has decided, that decision has been made, you know. And from my standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to move volleyball to the spring. But we are right now tied with football, and I think if football is going to play in the fall, then volleyball and soccer are playing in the fall as well. And I don't think that it's going to change from that, even though I think it solves a lot of problems should you move volleyball and soccer to the spring. That's just my own opinion. But I think that in regards to answering your question, Lauren Ware is certainly a discussion that Dee and I will have once that decision is made on moving volleyball to the spring.
I have another question for Matt. Would you consider Coach Rubio to be then one of your mentors throughout the years?
Yeah, there's no question. I think I got my master's in coaching, I think back in 2013 and 2014, and part of that program was you had to really narrow down your coaching philosophy. And when I began to start thinking about people who, you know, who I respect and people who have helped me. And I think when you look at what Dave's done, and he's pretty deeply rooted, obviously in the volleyball program, in the athletics department, in the university, and in the whole community. I think that's kind of where I, you know, kind of really got my whole coaching philosophy, is to really have roots in those four areas. And when you look at Dave and other great coaches who have been in, you know, been in programs for a very long time, you know, I think that's pretty important to me. And so, yeah, I would certainly say, you know, Dave is definitely one of my, you know, one of my mentors, and somebody who's had a big positive, you know, influence on me.
Dave, I was just going to ask you, why do you think it makes sense to move volleyball to the spring? Because if you did that, there would also be some facility issues. You guys would be sharing the facilities with some other sports like basketball, the two basketball programs, and also gymnastics as well.
Right. It would be certainly challenging, Ryan. I think it's certainly not ideal, but I think time right now is our enemy. And when you move the season to the spring, I think time now becomes an ally. And it allows us time to figure out the virus. And really the only solution to the virus, the only way we mitigate the virus is if we find a vaccine. And so right now, as we start to go through all the protocol of bringing the players in and all the different phases that we're talking about, I think we could put all those things on the back burner if we moved it to spring. And I think for 1 year, the facilities issues can be solved. It was not going to be ideal. It's not going to be perfect by any means. I think the sacrifices are going to need to be made by everybody. But I think for one season, we could probably make it work. And it certainly makes a lot of sense to do that. But I think there's other reasons, unforeseeable reasons that I don't know, and that maybe people above my pay grade, are considering. And I think that's what's happening, is that there's information out there that I don't have. So it's easy for me to stand on the side and be, the Monday morning quarterback and say, I think this is best. But I think there's a lot of people who are smarter than I am that have a bigger picture than I have that are making these decisions. And there's a reason why they're keeping us in the fall. And I trust those people who are making the decisions that it's the right thing to do.
And so you also mentioned the two scheduling options. It was the double round robin, and then I think the other one was just to add some games. Is there, of those two, do you have a preference? Is there one you'd rather see than the other?
Well, I think that, it certainly gives us the flexibility now. We had 4 weeks of non-conference play and then, 10 weeks of conference play. And now if we went to a double round robin, it gives us 3 extra weeks there to put in some some bye weeks that allows us to make up matches should we need to. And I think those are really good options for us. I'm in favor of a double round robin just because it gives us a 2 champion. Then we get a chance to play everyone the same amount of time. But I don't think we're out of the woods on this thing. There's a lot of things like on travel, getting on an airplane alone, you're at high risk. They're talking about putting players in individual rooms. So there's a significant cost increase with that. How do you take care of the kids from a food standpoint? I mean, there's just so many different things that we have to mitigate to try to make this thing work. And then what happens is the coaches go down and they got to go in quarantine for 2 weeks. Who's coaching the team? I mean, there's just a long laundry list of potential issues that you have to deal with should they arise. And they're going to arise. That's the thing. It's not like they're not going to happen. It's going to happen. And so, you're trying to figure out how to mitigate all those things, and that's a tough one to handle. I mean, that's like me trying to figure out a calculus problem. I mean, that's almost impossible.
Dave, if you had to step right into Pac-12 play, I mean, what are the challenges of that, of foregoing the non-conference season?
Boy, that's a really good question, Kim. I think in a young team like us, it certainly makes it more challenging. With us losing all the seniors that we did last year and integrating a new setter, and it's going to be a freshman potentially, or even if it's a Kia Warrior, who's the other setter in the program, someone who's isn't used to our system and the things that we're doing in our gym. I think it's a challenge. And, really the one player that we have that we can really lean on is Paige Whipple, who's going to be a 4-year starter for us most likely. And then you got Kamali Hiopo, who was playing out of position for 90% of the year. So we don't have a lot of experience. So I think the one thing that's very unforgiving that's proved over the course of time is inexperience. And we're certainly going to come to the table. So maybe that, with the little amount of playing time, the playing field becomes more level for us. But only time will tell. And talk to me after 3 weeks of conference play, and I'll let you know what my answer is on that.
So one advantage that volleyball does have compared to soccer and football is that it's a non-contact sport. But what kind of, precautions have you and maybe other coaches have discussed, or have you thought about that you could do to help mitigate the spread of the virus? I know one thing is maybe the blockers are close to the other team, so maybe that could be an issue, or maybe not switching benches. Like, have you thought about any things that you guys could do to help that?
I think all those things have been put on the table, Ryan. And, I think the players will be in masks when they play. I think the coaches will be in masks when they play. And I think that those are things. There's certain realities to it. It's like what Jim Harbaugh said for Michigan. It's just there's no mitigating football, you know, and there's certain aspects of volleyball that you're just not going to be able to mitigate. And certainly when you're facing face to face with only the net in between you, separating the two, there's going to be opportunities to breathe in the opponent's, you know, droplets. And so I don't think there's any way of getting around that. I mean, the way to mitigate that is they both wear masks, you know. So, but we've discussed all those possibilities. We're going through the different phases and different phases. You know, what's interesting is that typically when you go to phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3 and all the way for us to phase 4, right? Phase 4 is when you bring everyone together. And typically when you go through those different phases, and it takes a certain amount of time to go through each particular phase, by the time you get to the final phase, that means that you've mitigated all risks and the chances of catching something are really, really low. Well, in reality, when you get to phase 4 for us in the final phase, now you're bringing everyone together, so the chances of catching something is not even greater. You know, so it's working like the opposite direction of what you normally would be when you're doing something like this.
Hi, Dave. So, you know, with everything seeming, you know, we keep talking about everything's evolving. Last couple of weeks have been tough, you know, and we're not even sure yet. Everything's paused on bringing student athletes back. And then today we hear that the Rose Bowl parade has been canceled. They still think they're having the Rose Bowl, but the parade's been canceled. Do you really think that that you're going to have a season before January?
You want me to put a percentage on that, or
whatever you want to do?
Yeah, I think it's really tough for us to pull this off. I mean, I'm hopeful. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I feel terrible for the seniors, you know, for someone like Paige, you know, for all those seniors who, you know, that the 3 years leading up to the culmination of their career and their ideal that they're going to have the best season of their career, you know, their senior year. But this is unprecedented times, you know, and I just don't know how we can mitigate all the risks, you know, and there's a lot at stake, obviously, and that's why we're pursuing the season. And but we know that because of the virus and the pandemic, that there's certain things that are going to be turned inside out. You know, whether or not that's higher education, and then right on the heels of athletics. We knew the day of reckoning eventually was going to come to athletics, right? The facilities race, right? The chasing the salaries and I mean, everything that was being written the last 10 years about how that people are building these crazy facilities and all these bells and whistles for all these programs, and the salaries going skyrocketing, and I mean all the press that went with that, and I think in everyone's mind that's attached to athletics is that we knew that something eventually was going to stop that. I don't think anyone thought that it would be this, but it certainly has completely grinded to a halt, and now we're just hoping, you know, your thought process completely changes. So we're just hopeful that we can even have a season. You know, forget about all the other stuff. I just don't know if we're going to be able to do all the things necessary to mitigate the risks.
Anybody else have any other questions? Maybe one we could end on a more positive note. All right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you everybody for coming. I appreciate it. And
hey, Danny, I think PJ had one. PJ did have one.
Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah,
can I ask one more?
Yeah.
So Dave, let's end on, this is a little more positive. So, you know, really, what was it that, you know, Matt comes from this family that you guys have been close to, you've been close, the program's been close to for a long time. You know, really, what's so special about Matt? You've talked about it in general terms, but specifically, what was it that you said, oh, Matt's the guy?
I think each coach has their own, especially when you've been in the coaching profession as long as I've been, and you've cycled through several coaches, and I can tell you that loyalty and trust, if you ask the head coaches how important that is when they hire an assistant. And I think there's enough coaches who've been out there for any length of time will tell you that they've been on both ends of it. They've had unbelievable coaches that have watched it, watched their back and been able to be loyal and trustworthy, hardworking, and fulfill all the criteria that you want an assistant coach to fill. And then we've hired some coaches that maybe haven't done as good a job at that. And in my last, here I am in the back nine of my career, and it's say I have 4 to 5 years left. I wanted to be with somebody who, in my mind, was almost like family. And the Dyke family and I go way back, and that Matt's father is a mentor of mine. So I mean, he's 5 or 6 years older than I am, but we grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same high schools, went to the same junior highs, went to the same colleges, and we've been close friends for a long time. So I've known Matt well before he was born. So to me, it made all the sense in the world to hire someone, and Matt put himself in a position to be hired. That just doesn't come just because of my relationship with the family. You got to have the experience. You got to have the ability to teach. You got to have the connections. You've had to put your time in order to be a serious consideration to be hired. And Matt has done that. And so for me, as I kind of finish up my round of golf here, I think it's really important that someone is like Rita's family for me, and regardless of what happens, she's someone, and Matt is like that with me as well. And Greg was like that for me. Greg, and even though I didn't know Greg as well when I hired him, by the time Greg left, he was someone that I felt was every bit as part of the Rubio family and the Arizona Volleyball family as anybody that coached here. And so it was important for me just personally to be able to hire someone that came with that kind of credentials behind them. And Matt certainly fit that.
Cool.
Oh, I just want to ask one more question. The Pac-12 announced when they announced that they're going to a conference-only schedule that any players who don't want to participate this year would be able to get their scholarship would still be covered. Have any players approached you about maybe just being uncertain about wanting to play or some of the concerns about playing in conditions like these?
No, they haven't. And I think that right now they have a very small view of what's going on here at the university. I mean, they're at home, and when you're at home, you're kind of in a bubble in itself. And I think once you step outside that bubble and you go to the university, and eventually they'll be on campus, then maybe some of them will have second thoughts about being exposed to our environment. And I don't know. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that won't happen. But, right now, no one has expressed that feeling to me about the, just apprehension that might come with playing.
Anybody have anything else? Okay, cool. Well, thank you guys. Thank you again for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Danny.
I appreciate you guys
Thanks.
coming on the call and taking the time, and it's great to have Matt on board. But thanks you guys for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks,
See
everyone.
ya.